Imagine a thread, woven not from silk or gold, but from stories, laws, and generations, stretching back through the mists of time for nearly 4,000 years. Empires that once bestrode the ancient world, the Babylonians, the Persians, the mighty Romans, have all crumbled to dust, their languages dead, their gods forgotten. Yet this single continuous thread of identity, the Jewish people, remains. It has endured conquests, exiles, and catastrophes that would have shattered any fundamental origin point of a people whose story has so profoundly shaped the course of human history. The answer is far more complex and fascinating than a simple dot on a map or a date in a textbook. It's a journey that begins not with a king or a conquest, but with a revolutionary idea in the mind of one man, in a world that was not yet ready for it. Before we embark on this incredible journey back to the dawn of this ancient identity, please take a brief moment to support our exploration of history. If you find this content valuable, hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Your support allows us to create more documentaries like this one. Now, let us begin our search for the true origin of the Jews. Our story commences in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, a land of sprawling cities, towering ziggurats, and a pantheon of powerful, often capricious gods. In the bustling city-state of Ur of the Chaldees, a man named Abram, later to be known as Abraham, lived amidst this vibrant polytheistic culture. The narrative, as recounted in the book of Genesis, presents a pivotal moment, not of military might
Abram
or
receives
political
a call
upheaval,
from a single,
but of
unseen deity,
personal revelation, a God who is not tied to any city, statue, or natural force. This was a radical, almost incomprehensible concept in the ancient Near East. This God made a promise, a covenant, which would become the foundational pillar of Jewish identity. He was commanded to leave his home, his family, and his land, and to journey to a place he would be shown, a land that would be promised to his descendants. In return for his faith, this God would make of him a great nation and bless him, and through him all the families of the earth would be blessed. This is the traditional starting point, a pact between a divine being and a human family. From a historical and archaeological perspective, the story of Abraham is shrouded in the mists of the 2nd millennium BCE. There are no external records, no stelae bearing his name, no direct archaeological evidence of his specific journey. Point to the anachronisms in the text, details that seem to reflect a later period when the stories were compiled. Yet, to dismiss the narrative for its lack of empirical proof is to miss its profound significance. Whether one views Abraham as a literal historical figure or as a foundational patriarch whose story encapsulates the origins of his people, the themes established with him are the bedrock of Judaism. The ideas of monotheism, of a covenantal relationship with God, of being a people set apart for a specific purpose, and the deep, unbreakable connection to a specific piece of land, the land of Israel, all begin here. This was not the birth of a nation in a conventional sense. It was the birth of a nation defined by a shared faith and a divine promise. The narrative continues through Abraham's son, Isaac, and his grandson, Jacob, whose name is changed to Israel after a mysterious wrestling match with a divine being. The name Israel can be interpreted as one who strives with God, a theme of struggle, questioning, and engagement that would echo throughout Jewish history. Jacob's 12 sons would become the progenitors of the 12 tribes of Israel, transforming a single-family lineage into a confederation of clans. A severe famine forces this nascent nation to migrate to Egypt, where one of Jacob's sons, Joseph, had risen to a position of great power. Initially welcomed, their status over generations deteriorates. The book of Exodus describes a new Pharaoh, one who did not know Joseph, who, fearing the growing numbers of the Israelites, enslaves them in brutal bondage. This period of suffering and slavery in Egypt is the crucible in which a collective identity is forged. They were no longer just the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were a people bound together by shared oppression and a collective yearning for freedom. It is into this scenario that the figure of Moses emerges, perhaps the single most important individual in Jewish history. Raised in the Egyptian court but born an Israelite, Moses is chosen by God at the burning bush to be the liberator of his people. The ensuing narrative is one of divine plagues, a stubborn Pharaoh, and the miraculous parting of the Red Sea, an event that represents the ultimate deliverance from bondage to freedom. The Exodus is not merely a historical memory. It is the central defining event that is relived and retold every year at the Passover Seder. It is the moment that God intervened directly in history to rescue his chosen people, solidifying the covenant made with Abraham. Yet, freedom was only the beginning of the journey. The true formation of the nation of Israel occurred in the stark wilderness of the Sinai Desert. It was there, at the foot of Mount Sinai, that the Israelites experienced a collective revelation. According to tradition, God revealed the Torah, the core of Jewish law and teaching, to the entire nation. This included the Ten Commandments, the ethical and ritualistic framework that would govern their society. This event, the Israelites were no longer just a group of liberated slaves. They were given a constitution, a spiritual and legal blueprint for nationhood. They became a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, bound by 613 commandments, or mitzvot, that would shape every facet of their lives, from diet and dress to commerce and criminal justice. This covenant at Sinai was different from the one with Abraham. It was a bilateral agreement. In exchange for God's protection and the Promised Land, the people of Israel pledged to live by his laws. The 40 years of wandering in the desert that followed were a period of testing, purification, and consolidation, transforming a generation born in slavery into a nation ready to enter its ancestral homeland. Upon entering the promised land of Canaan, the Israelites embarked on a long and often violent process of settlement and conquest. The period of the Judges was a tumultuous era, with the 12 tribes functioning as a loose confederation, often threatened by neighboring peoples like the Philistines. The lack of central authority led to chaos, summed up by the recurring refrain in the book of Judges. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did as they saw fit. This instability eventually led to a popular demand for a king, a desire to be like all the other nations. The prophet Samuel reluctantly anointed the first king, Saul, marking the transition from a tribal federation to a centralized monarchy around 1000 BCE. Saul's reign was fraught with challenges, but it laid the groundwork for his successor, King David. It was David who truly unified the tribes, conquered the Jebusite city of Jerusalem, and established it as the nation's political and spiritual capital. David is remembered as Israel's greatest king, a skilled warrior, a poet, and a man deeply devoted to God, despite his personal failings. He envisioned a central sanctuary in Jerusalem, a permanent home for the Ark of the Covenant, which housed the tablets of the Ten Commandments. However, it was his son, Solomon, who would bring this vision to life. Solomon's reign is depicted as a golden age of peace, prosperity, and wisdom. He oversaw the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem, a magnificent structure that took 7 years to build. The temple was more than just a building. It became the central axis of Jewish life. It was the one and only place where the prescribed sacrificial rituals could be performed. It was seen as the literal dwelling place of God's presence, the Shekinah, on earth. Pilgrimages were made to Jerusalem 3 times a year for major festivals, unifying the people from all corners of the land. With a centralized monarchy and a central sanctuary, the identity of the Israelites was now inextricably linked to a specific dynasty, a specific capital city, and a specific sacred building. They had all the trappings of a conventional ancient nation. But this period of unity and grandeur would prove to be tragically short-lived. Following the death of King Solomon, his son Rehoboam's harsh policies led to a rebellion. the kingdom fractured into two. The 10 northern tribes formed the Kingdom of Israel, with its capital in Samaria, while the tribes of Judah and Benjamin remained loyal to the Davidic dynasty in the south, forming the Kingdom of Judah, with its capital still in Jerusalem. This division was not just political, it was also religious, as the northern kingdom established its own cultic centers to compete with the temple in Jerusalem. For the next 2 centuries, these two Israelite kingdoms existed side by side, sometimes as rivals, sometimes as allies. This period also saw the rise of the classical prophets, figures like Elijah, Amos, Hosea, and Isaiah, who acted as the nation's conscience. They railed against social injustice, idolatry, and the corruption of the kings and priests. They warned that if the people and their leaders did not uphold their end of the covenant, the consequences would be dire. Their warnings went largely unheeded. In 722 BCE, the mighty Assyrian Empire swept down from the north and conquered the Kingdom of Israel. Following their standard policy, the Assyrians deported a significant portion of the population and settled foreigners in their place. These 10 northern tribes were scattered throughout the Assyrian Empire, and over time assimilated and vanished from the stage of history, becoming known as the 10 Lost Tribes of Israel. The southern kingdom of Judah survived this onslaught, but it was a vassal state, living under the shadow of powerful empires. Despite moments of religious revival, particularly under King Josiah, the nation was caught in the geopolitical vice between the rising power of Babylon, especially Jeremiah, and the waning power warned of impending doom. In 586 BCE, their prophecies came to pass. The Babylonian emperor Nebuchadnezzar conquered Judah, sacked Jerusalem, and in a cataclysmic event that would be seared into the Jewish consciousness forever, he destroyed Solomon's temple. The educated, skilled, and elite members of Judean society were forcibly marched into exile in Babylon. The first chapter of national existence in the exile was a crisis of unprecedented proportions. It was a theological catastrophe. The people had lost their land, their king, and their temple, all the things they believed guaranteed their covenant with God. How could this have happened? Had their God abandoned them? Was he weaker than the gods of Babylon? It was in the crucible of this exile that Judaism underwent one of its most profound transformations. Denied the ability to perform sacrifices at the temple, the focus of religious life had to shift. Jewish identity became less about place and ritual, and more about text and community. Prophets like Ezekiel gave the exiles a message of hope and future restoration. Scribes, perhaps including the figure known as Ezra, began the monumental task of gathering, editing, and canonizing the sacred texts that would form the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh. The synagogue, or a precursor to it, emerged as a new institution, a place for communal prayer, study of the Torah, and mutual support, a replacement for the centralized temple. The Sabbath and the practice of circumcision became even more important markers of Jewish identity in a foreign land. The Judeans in Babylon refused to assimilate. They clung to their traditions, their memories of Zion, and the belief in a future redemption. They learned a crucial lesson, that God was not confined to the temple in Jerusalem. He was omnipresent and could be worshipped anywhere. They were no longer just a nation tied to a land. They were becoming a people of the book. Judaism was becoming portable. This period of exile came to an end when the Persian Empire, under Cyrus the Great, conquered Babylon in 539 BCE. In a remarkable act of policy, Cyrus issued a decree allowing the exiled peoples, including the Jews, to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples. A wave of exiles, led by figures like Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, made the arduous journey back to Judah, now a province of the Persian Empire called Yehud. They were met with a desolate land and a population that had remained behind, creating new social and religious tensions. After many delays, their primary task was the reconstruction of the completed and dedicated around 516 BCE. While it lacked the legendary splendor of Solomon's temple, its existence was a powerful symbol of rebirth and the continuity of the covenant. Under the leadership of Ezra the scribe, a religious reformation was enacted. The Torah was publicly read and established as the ultimate authority for the community. Intermarriage was discouraged to preserve the unique identity of the people. It was during this Second Temple period that the term Jew, derived from the name Judah, came into common use, signifying a member of the covenantal community centered around the temple in Jerusalem. For the next few centuries, Judea existed under foreign rule, first the Persians, then the Greeks after the conquests of Alexander the Great. The arrival of Hellenism, Greek culture, language, and philosophy, presented a new and potent challenge. Some Jews were attracted to this cosmopolitan culture, while others saw it as a grave threat to their traditions. This tension exploded into open revolt in the 2nd century BCE when the Seleucid Greek ruler Antiochus IV Epiphanes attempted to suppress Judaism, desecrating the temple and forbidding practices like circumcision and Sabbath observance. A family of priests, the Hasmoneans, known as the Maccabees, led a guerrilla war that, against all odds, succeeded in driving out the Greeks and rededicating the temple. This victory, commemorated by the festival of Hanukkah, led to a brief period of Jewish independence under the Hasmonean dynasty. However, internal strife and a weakening leadership left the Hasmonean kingdom vulnerable. In 63 BCE, the Roman general Pompey captured Jerusalem. This period saw the rise of various Jewish sects, of Rome, each with a different vision for Judaism's future. The Sadducees were the priestly and aristocratic elite, tied to the temple rituals and generally cooperative with Roman rule. The Pharisees were a more popular movement focused on the study and interpretation of the oral law, which they believed was given to Moses at Sinai alongside the written Torah. The Essenes were an ascetic, separatist group, possibly associated with the community that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was a time of immense religious ferment and political tension, with a growing messianic expectation that a divine Redeemer would arrive to overthrow the Roman oppressors and restore Israel's glory. This simmering tension between the Jewish population and their Roman rulers finally boiled over into the Great Jewish Revolt in 66 CE. After a brutal and bloody war, the Roman legions, led by Titus, laid siege to Jerusalem. In the year 70 CE, in an event that would prove to be the most catastrophic in Jewish history since the destruction of the First Temple, the Romans breached the city walls, massacred a vast portion of the population, and burned the Second Temple to the ground. The physical center of Jewish life for over 500 years was gone. Another, later revolt under Bar Kokhba in 135 CE was also crushed, leading the Romans to rename Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina and Judea Syria Palestina in an attempt to erase the Jewish connection to the land. The destruction of the Second Temple could have, and perhaps should have, spelled the end of the Jewish people. With no temple for sacrifice and no land to call their own, their identity was once again thrown into existential crisis. But the seeds planted during the Babylonian exile came to full flower. A group of Pharisaic sages, led by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who according to legend escaped a besieged Jerusalem in a coffin, established a new center of Jewish learning in the town of Yavne. Here they began the monumental task of reimagining Judaism for a world without a temple. This was the birth of Rabbinic Judaism. Prayer, study, and acts of loving kindness fully replaced the temple as the central institution. The authority shifted from the priests to the rabbis, the scholars who interpreted the sacred texts. Over the next several centuries, these rabbis compiled their extensive legal and ethical discussions into a vast collection of writings. First came the Mishnah, a codification of the oral law, completed around 200 CE. This was followed by the Gemara, a detailed commentary on the Mishnah. Together, the Mishnah and Gemara form the Talmud, an encyclopedic work that became the central text of Rabbinic Judaism, second only to the Torah itself. The Talmud became a portable homeland for the Jewish people, a blueprint for living a holy life under any circumstance in any land. The Jewish people were now scattered across the globe in what is known as the diaspora. Communities flourished and developed unique customs in Babylon, North Africa, Spain, the Sephardic tradition, and the Rhineland of Germany and France, the Ashkenazi tradition. They lived as a minority in Christian and Muslim lands, facing periods of tolerance and creativity, but also enduring centuries of persecution, expulsion, and violence. Yet, through it all, they were bound by a shared text, a shared calendar of holidays, a shared memory of Zion, and a shared hope for a future messianic redemption and a return to their ancestral land. So, what is the true origin of the Jews? It is not a single moment, but a continuous dynamic process of formation and reformation. It is a story that begins with a patriarchal promise in Mesopotamia, is forged in the crucible of Egyptian slavery, and is given its constitutional and spiritual framework in the Sinai wilderness. It is an identity that becomes tied to a land, a king, and a temple in Jerusalem, only to learn to survive their loss not once, but twice. It is an identity that transforms from one centered on sacrifice and place to one centered on text and community. The origin is a blend of history and memory, of divine covenant and human resilience, of a people who, for millennia, have stubbornly insisted on striving with God and with history, weaving a single, unbroken thread that connects the ancient world to our own. This journey of survival, adaptation, and unwavering faith is, in itself, the truest origin of the Jewish people. We hope this deep dive into one of history's most enduring stories has been enlightening. If you wish to continue exploring the fascinating narratives that have shaped our world, please remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching.